Good evening. His Eminence, Thomas Cardinal Collins, is from Guelph, Ontario. He has a Master's of Arts in English from the University of Western Ontario and a Bachelor's of Theology from St. Peter's Seminary in London, Ontario. He was ordained to the priesthood in May 1973. He specialized in sacred scripture with a special focus on the Book of Revelation while studying in Rome. After holding various academic and religious appointments in Canada, he was named Archbishop of Toronto in December 2006. In January 2012, Archbishop Collins was elevated to the College of Cardinals by Pope Benedict XVI. He is the 4th cardinal in the history of the Archdiocese of Toronto and the 16th in the history of Canada. He is chair of the Board of Governors of St. Augustine Seminary and chair of the Board of Directors for the Redemptorist Mater Missionary Seminary. In 2008, he was elected president of the Assembly of Catholic Bishops of Ontario. He also serves on a committee of the International Commission on English in the Liturgy that assists in preparing language translations of liturgical texts. We're really honored to have His Eminence join us and accept our invitation, and we look forward to hearing about Cardinal Newman. So if you would all join me in giving a warm welcome to His Eminence Cardinal Collins.
Thanks for that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's always a joy to be here to spend a little time together in this beautiful chapel, above all in celebrating the liturgy, but also at occasions like this, when we can reflect upon themes important to our life in Christ, and in a very particular way today, to reflect a little bit upon the life of John Henry Newman. And the theme that is of this presentation is to stress especially his role as a mentor, as a person who led so many people closer to God and also to help them to understand themselves. Newman was indeed that in his life, and so I'll talk about that. That'll be the main theme. I might also throw in a few things about some of the spiritual themes that are important, the things he would stress as he was guiding others, giving them spiritual direction or mentorship, and I'll also do a little show and tell. I can't resist that. Now you'll realize I'm just an amateur Newman kind of guy. I don't really, I'm not a real expert on this, but I want to share with you just whatever I can about the great John Henry Newman. Known quite affectionately but disrespectfully by the young students of the school in his later years as Jack. But I don't think they ever said that to his face. But Newman is, I'll just go from different things. But above all, Newman as a mentor. That's the kind of leadership he used above all. So, John Henry Newman continues to influence the church and the world. And I think his influence is all the greater as we deal with the kind of situation we face in our world right now, where there is a kind of a receding of the tide of faith, which was spoken about in the 19th century, but where there's a kind of a secularism, which he could see as starting. He could see the way it was rising and building. And although he himself obviously did not deal with the specific issues which we are called to deal with in our present age, a lot of the themes that we deal with, the undermining of a sense of the human person, things of that nature, the sense of the state as being all-powerful, those kinds of things he was already beginning to deal with. And he noticed the first effects of secularization. So he has a great influence. He's a wise guy in an increasingly secular society. He's someone you can go back to again and again. Not only to his writings, as for example, the Grammar of Assent, which speaks to us of the whole issue of faith. How can you believe in something you can't absolutely prove? How can you do that? That was the kind of a question which he dealt with. His life, of course, is spectacular. Apologia pro vita sua, when he was attacked by Charles Kingsley for having been kind of deceitful as he made his way from Anglicanism to Catholicism. Kingsley accused him in 1864 of being kind of a closet Catholic while luring Anglicans into trusting him when he was secretly kind of undermining them. So how would he do that? Being accused of being a liar? A liar? Newman accused of that, a Victorian gentleman? And so he said, I say, Kingsley. So he thought, what can I do? I can't. How do you prove you're not a liar? The more, he said, the more eager I am, the more you'll think I'm just faking it, the more whatever. So he said, all I can do is just reveal my life to you. And so he dealt with a few of these things that Kingsley had brought against him. But then he has that wonderful line, which I love to use. I won't tell you who I would place in the slot of Kingsley and Newman's sentence. I can think of a few people. But anyway, I can think of a few people I've been dealing with lately. But here it is. When Kingsley said all this, he got about halfway through his thing. Newman says, "Away with you, Kingsley, and fly into space. I will deal no longer with your ideas, but with your person." So away with you and fly into space. So, what do we do? Here we are. Newman, reading his life is so important. So wonderful. I would recommend, if you want to first dip into Newman, the one I started me off on Newman is classic old biography by Mariel Trevor. 2-volume. It's really good. It tells a lot about Newman, the person. You get what an exciting life he had. He lived about 89 years. He did all kinds of extraordinary things. He was a very neat man. Half of his life was Anglican, half of his life was Catholic. Very well balanced that way. And so, so it's an extraordinary life that he led, and he dealt with all kinds of amazing things. He founded a university. He wrote 32 volumes worth of letters. He started up the English oratory. He dealt with all kinds of things. And in most of his writings, they weren't sort of thematically thought out. He wasn't someone going to say, "I'm going to produce a Summa Theologica" or something like that. But rather, they mostly responded to situations. For example, he was accused of being a liar. So he hadn't thought of giving his autobiography, but that stimulated him. So he wrote Apologia Pro Vita Sua. His great, profound analysis of the way doctrine develops and how it does not develop, how it develops into things that show it as proper development and not heresy, the essay on the development of Christian doctrine was the way he worked through in his mind the experience of coming to a deepness of a sense of the fullness of Catholic faith. And so he did it sort of with his pen, and at the end of it, he became a Catholic. But it came out of his personal experience. It was something that wasn't just the thing he thought up as the thing he's going to do next. It was that deep personal experience. That's one of the wonderful things about Newman. He's very human. What he did, you just sense, when especially you read his letters, read his writings, you just know this is a living, breathing person. With a lot of flaws and faults. He was a bit sensitive, to put it mildly. He was so super sensitive that he always thought everyone was against him. And one of the most delightful things in his writings is his personal journals. I hope none of our personal journals are going to be ever published. I don't think any of us will. But he was, since he's been canonized, they study everything. And he has this wonderful line, because he always felt people out to get him. And he had some justification for that, especially Kingsley. But he has this wonderful line in his journals. He says, "The bishops don't trust me. Nobody believes me. Everyone rejects me. The people in Rome don't trust me." And the next line is, "The Pope just made me a cardinal." It's so good, and he left it in. Oh, good old Newman. What a guy. He's just great. So Newman, you learn about that. If you want more of the heavy-duty stuff, the intellectual firepower, Ian, I guess it's Carr. It would be Ian Kerr or Carr, probably Carr, K-E-R. And this gives you that's a wonderful picture of Newman. But it gives the personal story, not so much as Trevor, but it gives you a lot of the analysis of his writing. So this is more the intellectual biography. And so when you see Newman, you see somebody who was always responding to an immediate situation. His letters, of course, are that. His development of Christian doctrine was that. His parochial and plain sermons were efforts to try to reach out to the students of the university. And and even his most sort of theoretical book about the grammar of assent, which you could say has to do with perfume making, but it's not the grammar of assent. Or you could say it's about ballooning, but it's not the grammar of assent. But it's the grammar of assent, saying yes to God. How can we say yes to God when we can't sort of photograph God and do that kind of thing? I think Professor Dockman should just get a copy, read it. It would solve a lot of his problems. But it came out of trying to help ordinary Catholics who are being bombarded with kind of high-powered Victorian atheists and agnostics, help them get through the day and realize that he sort of brought his immense intellectual firepower and he aimed it at targets that were causing trouble to the people of God. And so this is a man who's a servant. He was a servant of the people. He was really just someone, and in all of this, he was truly a mentor to so many people. People looked up to him. He was astonishing in that. He didn't have, I think I distinguish, you want to say, how can you have influence? How can you affect society? One way is through power. And power is good if it's used for good. Authority, things like that. That's why we expect our politicians to care for the vulnerable. And our judges too, not so bad if they cared for the vulnerable and had a deeper sense of the human person. Not as expendable, maybe dependent upon their worthiness to live, on how well they function. If they don't function too well, maybe they shouldn't be around. That vision, of course, is something we don't want in judges or politicians. But I won't get onto that theme. I've been saying enough about that recently. But power is something that should be used for the common good. Newman sometimes had power, not very often. He did found an oratory. He founded a university. And in fact, he wasn't this kind of ethereal character you sometimes think of him as, kind of always in high intellectual endeavors. A lot of his writings have to do with, buying food and, fixing the furnace and things of that. He was a nitty-gritty kind of guy. He had to run a college and so on. So he dealt with that. He had authority over his institutions. But that is not so much his great gift. The wonderful leader of the church in England in his time, who exercised power for the glory of God, was Henry Manning, the other cardinal. The cardinal who was the great master bishop who he built in Wiseman's work at Westminster, the sort of London diocese. He built schools, he built hospitals, he built orphanages, and Cardinal Manning was the great initiator in many ways of the social teachings of the Catholic Church. If ever there was a criticism of Newman, it was he was too much into mentoring people, especially rich aristocrats, that he was not so much into, helping the needy and all that. That's a bit of a blank spot in a bit of his work. But I think it may be a false accusation. He's sometimes accused of that. But Cardinal Manning was one who was right there. He wasn't a mentor of anyone, I don't think. He didn't influence so much, he commanded. That's like I heard somebody say that in the Jesuit tradition, spiritual directors discern, provincials decide. And I think really Manning was more of that second thing. And a great man. But Newman was he was a person who was a friend. He was, like I said about Thomas More, born for friendship. Well, Newman operated that way, not by building this or that, not by commanding, but by influencing people. I know there's a religious community in Quebec where Cardinal Lacroix is a member. Their symbol is a fish hook. Not the net, but the hook. I think maybe you might say Manning was the net, kept them all in. Newman was the hook. One at a time, influence, one at a time. And he did that amazingly. He was truly born for friendship. He had an extraordinary range of friends. And that was the way in which he had a profound influence, not only in his own time, but through his letters, through his life, through his books, and through the influence he had after that. He has continued to have a great influence down through time. Manning also did great work, and I think in a sense he's been too much forgotten. You build the schools and hospitals and serve the poor. Maybe you're not remembered as much as the extraordinary John Henry Newman, who had this great gift of communication and who touched the hearts of people. I don't think Manning touched hearts so much as he commanded and things like that. Although when he died, there were the poor of London lined up at his funeral because Manning was the one who had stood up for the poor. He was there on the picket line with the striking dock workers. Manning, in all his cardinalatial majesty, was there marching with the poor. And so I think it's something to each had his own strength. I think we need them both, concave and convex. We need leadership that is authority. We need leadership that is influence. We have in the time of the 16th century, Charles Borromeo, the great authority figure who reformed the church. And he was a great hero of Cardinal Manning, who began a whole order of priests based upon Charles Borromeo. Francis de Sales, who was the one whose famous he said, "You catch more people with honey than with vinegar." And he was the one who wrote letters to people, he met people, and they always said if you want to defeat someone in an argument, you get someone else. If you want to convert them, you get Francis de Sales. Because his language was gentle, his approach was loving and thoughtful. And not surprisingly, when Newman became a cardinal, he had to pick a kind of a title, like a motto. And so he picked something from Francis de Sales. That was his spirit, where Francis was writing to a young archbishop who wanted to know how to preach. So Francis wrote about a 40-page letter, and he said at one point, if you want to preach, the lips speak to the ears, but heart speaks to heart. Cor ad cor loquit. And that's what Newman took as the motto of his life. It would be, heart speaks to heart. I think we see in that, there are the words of a mentor, not a commander, that was Manning, but a mentor. And the two of them didn't get on with one another at all. Sad to say, two great bishops, great saints, I think holy men, each needed. But there's the Newman fans always think that Manning tried to scuttle Newman being made a cardinal. Well, that's really fair or not. But certainly Manning and Newman didn't really get along well. And when after Newman's death, his brother, I think it was his brother Francis, wrote a searing attack on Newman, someone asked Manning, Cardinal, what do you think of this ferocious book on Newman, this picture of Newman in his brother's book? Apparently, Manning said, a photograph, an absolute photograph. And Manning, in one of his great books, I love Manning as well as Newman. Manning has a great book called The Eternal Priesthood. He talks about the different kinds of priests. You have a hard-working priest, the faithful priest, the suffering priest, the poor priest serving the needy. And then you have the aristocratic priest, swanning around with the aristocracy, writing books people read all the time, giving fancy sermons. Don't be like that. So I always do think that they're both on parallel, adjacent clouds, I do suspect, up in heaven there. And I could just imagine, I always say this, I haven't even heard this before, Newman taking out a little glass of celestial sherry and saying, I say, Manning, have they set the date for your beatification yet? But that would be kind of the way he would do it, you know. Anyway, enough of that. I say. Anyway, Newman himself was influenced by people in this kind of personal way. And he received as well as giving this mentorship, you might say. In his youth, he had a wonderful teacher, spiritual guide called William Myers, who, when Newman was 16, he had this great conversion experience. And he went from being a kind of bland, uncommitted Christian to being a fervent evangelical Christian in the Anglican church tradition, but nonetheless a person who believed in Jesus as his Lord and Savior. And he never left that. He later became, October the 9th, 1845, he became a Catholic. But he always kept that profound personal connection to the Lord. And that he got largely through the advice, example, and good example of William Myers, his teacher when he was a teenager. So teenagers are influenced by wonderful teachers. I know I was influenced in my life by a wonderful mentor, Father John Newstead, and many others. I think you all know this experience. That influence is so profound, it changes hearts. It's it's like great teachers. It's just like Paul VI says, in matters of religion, people don't listen to teachers as much to witnesses, and only teachers if they are witnesses. And I think he saw in William Myers someone who was what he said he was. And very often, sometimes I think young people can be influenced by, you don't have to be a youth to influence, just somebody who is really deeply has integrity and authenticity, and that's what he found in this man. There's another person in his life who greatly influenced him and who died quite young. That was Hurrell Froude. I think that's pronounced. I never know how to pronounce that, but I think it's Froude. It looks like that. Hurrell Froude was a friend of his, university students together, really, really good friends. Again, Newman had many good friends, lots and lots of friends, but he had several really intimate, close friends. And he and Hurrell and his father, the father of his friend, went on a trip to Italy. And they were journeying together, these best friends, they're really going together. And his father. And he really influenced, especially as Myers had helped be a mentor to Newman to get him to go deep and not just be a superficial Christian. His friend led him into a deep sense of the apostolic succession, of the deep roots of the church, because he was working with Bible and Jesus in that context without much depth. But his friend said, oh, no, there's more. There's a whole patristic tradition, there's all of that. You've got to go deeper. And so when his friend died in his 20s, Newman was offered to, here's something in his, go to his room and take something you would like as a memento of your friend who has died. He wanted to take a theology textbook, and someone's already been spoken for. So he looked around, he saw the breviary, the Roman breviary. Hurlford was praying the Roman breviary. This was a 28-year-old Anglican in Oxford praying the Roman breviary. So Newman took it. And when he was an old cardinal, he said how much it meant to him. He said, and I use it to this day. It was the praying of the Psalms of the Roman breviary that he had received, along with great example from his dear friend who had died so young, that touched his heart and led him deeper into not only a relationship with Jesus, but with a sense of the fullness of the church. And so he had influence on an immense number of people, but he himself was influenced. When he became a professor, a don at Oxford, he was at Oriel College. Of course, the wonderful thing about Newman, I don't get time to do some of the themes he teaches, but the tremendous sense of the providence of God. He was really, really smart, and yet he failed. So it's consoling for university students. He flunked out of Oxford. He overstudied. I'm sure you would never do that, but he overstudied. And so he writes to his father, I have failed. He didn't get the first class degree that everyone thought he would get. This was not only embarrassing for him, because he always was the top of the class, but it's not only embarrassing for him, but it was also dangerous for his family, because he was relying on getting that in order to support the family, because his father's bank had gone bankrupt. And so he needed success to help care for his siblings and his family, and he failed. So that's something for someone who is quite remarkable. And then it is God's providence. So he went back again, and he didn't blame the examiners. He says in one of his letters, I cannot say I was not treated well. They gave me ample time, and they get plenty of concern, but I went blank. But later he went and applied for an Oriel Fellowship to be actually a professor at this college in Oxford. And of course, he relaxed a little bit, took a deep breath, and he just extraordinarily just blew them away with his extraordinary ability. If you want to have a sense of his extraordinary ability, again, I will just refer you to his letters. Here's volume 31, here's volume 1. And I always love reading this letter. Here's a letter from John Henry Newman writing to Elizabeth, his aunt. And it's near Christmas. He's talking about coming home for the Christmas holidays. And so here is John Henry Newman. The joyful 21st of December again approaches, when our books are closed according to delightful custom, and when I hope for the additional pleasure of seeing you all well and happy at home. Already in imagination I pay my respects to the minced pies, turkeys, and other good things of Christmas. In the meantime, the notches on my wooden calendar diminish apace, but not so the duty and the affection with which I am, dear aunt, yours ever, John H. Newman. He wrote that when he was 9 years old. So you get amazing. Oh, he's amazing. It's just reading him. It's just it's so. And if you want to read all 30 volumes, well, I've got a lot of them, but you might want, there's a packet of letters. A packet of letters is like some selected, just wonderful things. Oh, here's this one. This is a famous letter by Newman. There's this guy, a really kind of ferocious Monsignor in Rome, who wanted to be a little aristocratic. People thought Newman's a little too aristocratic sometimes, like Manning did. But this Monsignor Talbot thought that Newman was in Birmingham, not in Oxford, Cambridge, or London, or anything like that. Just in Birmingham, which in those days, where my mother comes from, by the way. But it was a place that was seen to be a little off the beaten track. And Talbot offers him the chance to preach before our high-class people in Rome. And so Newman says, this is the most, talk about a put-down. He did it even better than Kingsley, if you like that. It's just big. But, dear Monsignor Talbot, I have received your letter inviting me to preach next Lent in your church at Rome, to, quote, an audience of Protestants more educated than could ever be the case in England. However, Birmingham people have souls, and I have neither taste nor talent for the sort of work which you cut out for me, so I beg to decline your offer. So good. Anyway, that's good old Newman. So anyway, when he became a professor at Oriel, succeeding after having failed and back up again, one of his tasks, and I guess I've never been to Oxford, I mean, they have like classes and stuff, but they have tutors where you're one-on-one with the tutor. I've heard that the way that they do this, if you have a little glass of sherry, you start in the morning, go to the end, and then the tutor has a glass of sherry, you have a glass of sherry, next student comes in, tutor has a glass of sherry. You just keep going that way. It's especially good if they're doing exams. But the idea in those days, in 1828 to 1832, when he was at Oriel as a tutor, was that you would just stick to merely academic things, discuss Greek or something like that, and don't get into anything else. Treat your students like, buckets to be filled with knowledge. Is to use another vision, not a light, somebody, I think it was Dewey or somebody said, education is not filling a bucket, it's lighting a fire. Well, that's what Newman believed. So he saw his students as whole people. He gave them extraordinary knowledge. If you want to have a sense of look at the idea of university, you can see how he would do a little tutor session. He did that, sure. He tested them on, Herodotus and things like that. But he also saw each one as a person with a full life, a soul, a heart, cor ad cor loquitur, long before he picked that. And so he had a profound influence on these university students. They recognized in him someone who himself was authentic, and someone who cared for them, not just getting them through the exams, but cared for them as people. Now, this was far more than the university wanted him to do. And so they simply cut off his supply of students. They fired him, basically, because they wanted him just to go drill in Greek. But he had a deeper view, and you see in a greater form, it's mentorship. That's, drying, bringing in the thing. He wanted to be a mentor, a friend, someone to serve the people there by helping them to become better people, to go deeper in their spiritual life, their intellectual life, and everything, not just fill their heads with Greek or Hebrew or whatever. And so, because he had extra time, now he didn't have any students, what he did, and he took advantage of that, and so he started studying the fathers of the church. His incredibly devoted students were so grateful for having had the experience of being with John Henry Newman that they gave him a set of the fathers of the church, in Greek, of course, and Latin, which is no problem to anybody to write a letter like that. So he spent the next several years reading systematically the fathers of the church. This led him to a deeper sense of the faith, and ultimately, if you look at the development of Christian doctrine, it led him into the fullness of faith in the church. So he saw a teacher, a tutor, as a mentor, not as simply someone to fill students' heads with knowledge. Holy wisdom is what he offered. Wisdom, the whole person, cor ad cor loquitur, even then. So he influenced them that way. And people were drawn to him because they saw in him a man of integrity and a person who cared about them. His other way of influencing and giving this guidance, a spiritual guidance to people, was through his sermons. Now, he didn't do a kind of dramatic preaching style. He wouldn't have been like a TV evangelist. He came with his text, and he read it. Because that's what Anglican preachers did in those days. Later, when he became a Catholic, he noticed that the Catholic priests, who were none of them were as good preachers as him, they didn't read their text. They simply spoke more extemporaneously. And so he did that. He configured his style of preaching to what his fellow preachers did, so as not to stand out. There's someone like that. And once he was asked by a seminarian about how should I preach? Give me some advice. And so he wrote, when he was a cardinal, he wrote to the seminary, he said, well, just imagine you're on a plank, crossing a crevasse, which you just imagine down below. Aim for one point on the other side and go to it. Give the people one useful thing. That's a good bit of advice, It's amazing. He's astonishing. Like once he wrote he wrote this thing about inspiration, which became Vatican II. It's the theology of Dei Verbum comes from John Henry Newman. It was not accepted at the time, but he was criticized by a young professor for his theory of inspiration. And so when he wrote about it, he wrote at the end of the next thing, he said, at this time he was a cardinal and very famous, but he said, this is my sense of what inspiration means. But I may be wrong, and I offer my teachings to the judgment of the Catholic Church in case I made any errors. So he didn't throw his weight around, either his weight in terms of his role in the church or his intellectual firepower. He was extraordinary and a humble man. So when he preached, that's where you can get a hold of it, because thank goodness when he was doing it as an Anglican, he did it in written form. We got them. We have the actual written text. And, well, this is so small now. I got it in Kindle too, so I can make it bigger. That's important as you get older. But he has a great thing. He has a wonderful thing on real words. Like killing means killing, not dying, things like that. And so he has the whole thing about holiness. He challenged them, and he read them up, and people would flock to the St. Mary's Church where he was the pastor, and all the young people would come because he was tough and clear, and he felt he read their hearts. He was so in touch with his own weaknesses that everyone thought he was speaking to them. He just had that ability because he was a humble man. And he didn't blow them away with his brains and his intelligence. He just really tried to serve them. So much so that he influenced all the students packing into the church that the university authorities scheduled mealtime for the time he gave his homily so that the students wouldn't go. So they just skipped the meals and went to Newman. It was wonderful. And so that I think maybe his most useful way of mentoring us now is in the parochial and plain sermons. And later when he became a Catholic, he went through them. There's nothing in them he would change, really. It's just basic the Christian life. Live with integrity. Live with depth. This was John Henry Newman. Astonishing. So people began to form around him. And he had a community for whom he was the mentor. He was the friend, the older brother. He didn't do so well as an older brother of his other brothers. They all became atheists and so on. But nonetheless, he loved them to the end, even though one of them wrote an attack on him after his death. But he was kind of an older brother to all these students. And they loved him, and they cared for him, and they knew he cared for them. And so it's remarkable. He formed a little community around him. And finally, when he discovered, not by the influence of great Catholics, he didn't know any Catholics, except a few he met when he went to Italy, and he didn't like them very much, especially the English ones in Rome. He wasn't impressed by them. He got into the Catholic Church by thinking his way in, because he had free time, so he didn't have any students. He read and thought about it, and he thought, this is what God is calling me to. And it was a tremendous loss for him. He was a star. He was like famous. And he had a lifetime job with beautiful accommodations. And he gave it up on October the 9th, 1845, when he knelt down before the visiting passionist priest who has been sitting on the top of a stagecoach in the rain for hours to get there to Littlemore, and he went to confession to him. And there's a wonderful, I don't have a picture, a wonderful thing of him kneeling, this great Henry Newman, kneeling before the priest said he went to confession. He didn't have enough time, so he went to finish it the next morning. And then he was received into the church. Then he sent off this letter, and you can read all about that in the Apologia Probitus Sua. But his little community in Littlemore, this place outside of Oxford, several of them joined him. Some went into the Catholic Church before him, actually, although he tried not to influence them, because he realized he was responsible to their parents. And they didn't want him turning their children into Catholics. And so he was really scrupulous about that. And yet he couldn't stop them. And so I think that's a thing, his little community of, a significant number of students who came to him when he was at Oxford. One section of this presentation I like to call Friendship Celebrated and Betrayed. Because he was, as Morris said, born for friendship. And he had many, many, many friends. Think Hurl Froude, think of Myers, his mentor as a child. So many friends throughout his life, but he had some really close friends. One is Ambrose, now it's St. John, but it's probably St. John, I think is probably the way to pronounce it. I want to get it right. All these English names from I'm not too sure I'm doing it right, but nobody will ever know. So, but he was a good friend of his. He went to Rome with him. He became a priest with him, and he was a very faithful friend. Because Newman got into all kinds of trouble over time. Like there was this Italian ex-priest, former Dominican, I think, Franciscan, who was leading an outrageous life. And so Newman called him on it in one of his big speeches. He called him on it. And Achille, the former priest, sued him for libel. And Newman was relying for his facts upon Wiseman, Bishop Wiseman's notes that he had. And he said, well, Bishop Wiseman, could I have the evidence, please, that you put in your notes? Oh, I don't know where it went. So what was Newman going to do? So good old Ambrose went off to Italy trying to find the evidence. And anyway, he was a good friend, and he tried to help him. And he died younger than Newman. But he was a good friend. Another friend was Gerard Manley Hopkins. In fact, he received him into the church. If you ever want the ultimate, no college I know of can taught what when he founded Newman University in Dublin. If you look there, just with St. Stephen's Green behind you, looking at this sign on Newman's College, which is it says founder John Henry Newman, professor Gerard Manley Hopkins, student James Joyce. Okay, who can top that? 1, 2, 3. Wow! Oh my, that's great. And he influenced people that way. Hopkins, St. John, so many others, and many, many hundreds. And he had a certain indirect influence too. He was a mentor beyond his death, because one of his priests was Father Morgan, who was a young priest when Newman was an old priest. He died in 1890. And Father Morgan came along. He was a great friend to Mrs. Tolkien and to her children. And he was the mentor of J.R.R. Tolkien when he lived. And he became Tolkien all his life had a profound reverence for Father Morgan, who was to him, it was really Newman to him, was Newman's disciple's disciple is J.R.R. Tolkien. So there we are. It goes on. Influence lasts. Influence is profound. And yet, how do you understand the thing where he was so good at communicating, the master of English, and even at the age of 9. And he was so devoted to friendship. He chose a religious community that was based upon a community of friends, and yet he seemed to alienate people too. He had all these friendships which were kind of breaking apart. We think of Manning, who was very much influenced by Newman when younger, but then thought Newman was a little too shifty. He wasn't straightforward, he was more kind of, so he had they were polite to one another, but there wasn't the friendship had cooled. There was, of course, there are others as well, his brother, who really they had a falling out, sibling rivalry maybe, I don't know what it was, but they didn't get on. He was not successful in all his relationships. And he was, as I said, he was very sensitive. Maybe that was a bit of the problem. And there's a weakness, a stress, there's a crack in the life of Newman. that maybe helped him to be a better mentor because he didn't have it all together. I think he could see the anxieties of the students he spoke to because he was talking to himself. But he had all these stresses. Maybe the famous case of a failure in friendship was Frederick Faber, the one who wrote all those famous hymns, about the famous blank on it. It happens, senior moment. Anyway, Faber wrote all these hymns. There's the famous hymn written by Faber. Faith of Our Fathers, yeah, Faith of Our Fathers. So he wrote that, but Faber was a kind of very emotional guy. He loved speaking of, he had a very exotic spirituality. He was always into this this is not Newman's style. Newman wasn't into exotic stuff, really. And so I remember he had a statue of, I think he called it Mummy or something. It was the Blessed Virgin Mary. Faber kind of called it, and Newman says, he calls Mummy the Holy Mother of God. Not Newman's style. But anyway, he was he had his struggles. Newman, his other book, apart from writing the best book on almost everything you can think of, he of course created he was the best thing ever written on university, the idea of university, when he was founding the Irish University. And, that's another talk for another time. But I would say that one of the things to keep in mind about it is that he sees a university as being a community of friends. And that's what he was doing as a tutor. That's why they pulled the students from him. It's not just a bunch of books, not just filling the head. It's relationships, relationship of mentor and student, teacher and student, but also a relationship of student and student. It's that idea that, you learn from fellow students as much as you learn from books or professors. He believed that. And so when he would set up, he said at one point, I forget, I'm going to get this wrong, but something like, you're going to have a bunch of friends getting together, or you're going to have a bunch of people reading books. I prefer the first to the second if you want to get an education. So he had that profound sense that it's a humane reality. It's not sort of a icy, distant, mechanical thing. So I think that should keep us grounded when we think of distance learning and learning through, technology. That has its place, I'm sure he would have used it if he'd been at his time, but it's not enough. There's got to be heart speaks to heart, not keyboard speaks to processor. When Newman became a Catholic, he then became a priest, and he went to Rome with Ambrose St. John, and they looked around, maybe a Jesuit, maybe a Dominican, maybe a Franciscan, maybe a diocesan priest. What would he be? He thought he was called to be a priest, because he was in the Anglican Church. So he became an oratorian. This was founded by St. Philip Neri, the great saint, the apostle of Rome in the 1500s, who was quite a remarkable guy. He reached out, and his whole sense was personal influence. He was like Newman. Newman was like him. He was like Newman. He was an astonishing person. They say he carried a joke book in one hand and a Bible in the other. He would sing. He created a thing called the oratory. He created oratorios. So Handel and all that is based upon the oratory. He thought, bring people in, give them music. Like Augustine, the one who sings, prays twice. And reach their hearts, reach their mind, beauty, truth, goodness, all together. Don't hammer the faith, don't ram it down their throats, but attract. Give them that, reach out to them. Develop personal relationships. Stay in your room for one thing, he said, and people will come to you. He was a great confessor. And he had all these Roman aristocrats. He had one fellow with a very fancy beard, rather proud of it. He said, oh yes, cut off half of it and go through Rome with my cat under your arm. And the young man said, yes, Father. He cut it off and went through Rome. Got a little humility there, the young duke has got to get a bit of humility. So he did that. And that's what Newman went. He went into the oratory because it was a form of Christian mission, which was not so much organized, not so much clear, but rather worked through personal relationship. And that's really Newman's way. So we need power, we need authority, we need all those things. But I think what we really, really need in so many ways is heart speaks to heart. He was certainly a man of the head. I mean, so smart. I mean, my gosh. And so learned. So astonishingly learned. And so such a brilliant writer. He's amazing. Those sentences just roll on. I remember when I was trying to turn out something as my doctor when I was in Rome, I figured, how can I write well? How can I do it? How do you learn English, basically? And so what I would do is I'd read Newman all day long. I'd read Newman, read Newman, anything of Newman. And I figured I wasn't writing about, I was writing about the apocalypse. But I figured if you got Newman sloshing through your head, it's going to come out. Something that comes out is going to be better English than if it weren't. So Newman is good. So he had a great, his mind was great, but you see the person. He cares. Each person was special to him. That's why people revered him. They knew his faults. He was a little oversensitive, a little touchy. Maybe he was overreacting sometimes. But they would forgive it all in John Henry Newman because he was a man who cared. And he was a man of a great integrity. He gave up everything to become a Catholic. I mean, there goes his deployment for life. There goes everything. He lost his friends. He lost his family. He lost his job. Because he believed that the Catholic faith was true. And so he acted on that. He wanted reality. There's a great one of his talks called Unreal Words. So you can't use words that are false because then they're carrying you somewhere very dark. Don't use fancy words, nice words, pleasing words, or what's evil. Don't hide reality. Unreal words don't take you far. And so he wanted reality. And he wanted to know what it was. And he thought about it, prayed about it, lived it. And that's why on his tombstone he wanted to have these words, ex umbris et imaginibus in veritatis. So from shadows and images, illusions, into the truth. He wasn't a very logical guy in terms of dry logic, but he went for the truth. And he was very down to earth. I'll end off this, I've got some more stuff, but time's running out. So what I'll do, I'll just read a little bit of Newman. One of my favorite pieces. Oh, I got to read. I read it a bit as a sound check. But he was very conscious of the fact that he could get very arrogant. Like he thought he was. He thought the head of the college was wrong to told his students, but he got very irritated at that because he thought, "Who is he to tell me what to do?" So it's at that point he then went with his friend Harold on his trip over to Italy. And then his friend's father went off back home, and Newman said, "I think I'm going to go my own way." So he went to Sicily, got deadly sick, survived, and there was again another experience where he realized his own sense of being in command. He had to tame it a bit. And then finally, as he headed back to England, sensing I have a work to do, he wrote his most famous writing about this. He sees the light, lead kindly light, amid the encircling gloom, lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home. Lead thou me on. Keep thou my feet, I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step enough for me. I was not ever thus, nor prayed that thou shouldst lead me on. I love to choose and see my path, but now lead thou me on. I love the garish day, in spite of fears, pride ruled my will. Remember not past years. So long thy power hath blessed me, sure it still will lead me on. Or moor and fen, or crag and torrent, till the night is gone with the morn. Those angel faces smile, which I have loved long since, and lost a while. He realized, this is a humble man, he realized he could be self-willed, and he could be proud. And even though he thought he was right in these disputes he had, he could see, I love to be in control. That's one of the problems, in life. You get older, we're not in control. We become dependent sometimes, often, usually. All we can control is a postage stamp size, not worth it. And whether it's in leadership, we got to let go. And he saw that. He struggled with it. But he saw it when he was 32. And he was trying to come back. And the fact he was laid out flat in Sicily with people who were foreigners, you know, not Englishmen, but he was helpless. And that was one of the best things that ever happened to Newman. Because he always, just like flunking out of Oxford, that was one of the best things that ever happened to him. Because he realized, I'm not in control. And we got to realize that. And our dignity does not depend, our worthiness, on being in control. It comes from within. So that's a great lesson, divine providence. But his other thing is when he was, later on, he was running this oratory in Birmingham, and he wrote a little thing about how to be perfect. And I used to hand this out to all my seminarians when I was in my former life. So here it is. I'll try to do it in my best Newmanian style. I don't know what it sounds like, but I mean, I always imagine doing this. It is the saying of holy men that if we wish to be perfect, we have nothing more to do than to perform the ordinary duties of the day well. A short road to perfection, short, not because easy, but because pertinent and intelligible. There are no short ways to perfection, but there are sure ones. I think this is an instruction which may be of great practical use to persons like ourselves. It is easy to have vague ideas what perfection is, which will serve well enough to talk about when we do not intend to aim at it. But as soon as a person really desires and sets about seeking it himself, he is dissatisfied with anything but what is tangible and clear and constitutes some kind of direction towards the practice of it. We must bear in mind that what is meant by perfection, it does not mean any extraordinary service, anything out of the ordinary, or especially heroic. Not all have the opportunity of heroic acts of sufferings. But it means what the word perfection ordinarily means. By perfect, we mean that which has no flaw in it, that which is complete, that which is consistent, that which is sound. We mean the opposite to imperfect. As we know well what imperfection in religious service means, we know by the contrast what is meant by perfection. He then is perfect, who does the work of the day perfectly, and we need not go beyond this to seek perfection. You need not go out of the round of the day. I insist on this because it will simplify our views and fix our exertions on a definite aim. If you ask me what you are to do in order to be perfect, I say, first, do not lie in bed beyond the due time of rising. Give your first thoughts to God, make a good visit to the Blessed Sacrament, say the Angelus devoutly, eat and drink to God's glory, say the Rosary well, be recollected, keep out bad thoughts, make your evening meditation well, examine yourself daily, go to bed in good time, and you are already perfect. It's the little way of St. Teresa of Lisieux. Very different from Newman. It's do ordinary things extraordinarily well. That's the Christian life. There we are. What an amazing guide we have in John Henry Newman. Anyway, I think that's it now. Did anyone have any questions?
I ask you to go to the South Ambo and ask them from there.
Such an eye confusion because I notice as I'm getting older, my eyes are getting worse. You're not too clear over there. Cloth seems to shrink. In fact, it seems there's a lot of me that wasn't ordained, this part out here. And people speak more quietly. Have you noticed that? Oh, you don't. Most of you haven't noticed that yet. But anyway. Part of perfection. Part of perfection. So, anyone has any questions? I hope I can. If not, we'll all go into a party, which is very jumpy. Oh, yes, over there. Sure.
Thank you. This was really good. And I would like to declare, I have an interest to declare because I am actually a graduate from University College Dublin. So
oh, you did? You went there? Oh,
yeah,
wonderful.
I went there.
Did you see the sign?
Yes, I did.
Oh, wonderful.
And, that's how I came to know John Henry Newman, and I was also there when he was declared blessed.
Oh, wonderful.
Which was a great experience. But leaving that aside, you spoke so well and so fully about your role in the university, even though you said that it's another talk, but I felt that the way you developed your mentorship really spoke to me as an academic about the experience of tutoring students. And I would like to say that they don't drink sherry anymore in tutorials in Oxford right now, but be that as it may, yes, all the pleasure is gone. We live, as academics, we live against challenges which are to do with time and academic requirements and so on. And I was just wondering whether if you could point to one quality of Newman as a mentor that we as academics can take away tonight to think about in relation to our students and how we deal with them, that I would be immensely grateful.
Right.
Thank you very much, His Grace.
I think it is to love them. Love the students. That's that real, like, deeply respect, care for them. Treat the students not as, like everybody really, not as a what, but a who. And realize each student, we deal with the word of the mind, but the mind, the body, the whole thing, faith, reason, like as we have in the Fides Oratio, faith and reason are two wings in which we fly to God. We have to have both, mind and body. It's a great Catholic and. Which is it? Is it faith or works? Yes. Which is it? Scripture or tradition? Yes. And, so I think we get that sense of the whole person. I think that's, what if it's something to have John Henry Newman as your tutor? You think, oh my gosh, it's like Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. He was her spiritual director. Can you imagine? Wow, what that must be like. What did they do? No, you can't do that, can you? We fly on the wall and that kind of thing. But that is amazing, that thing, to be, what if they just say, founder, John Henry Newman, professor, George Mending Hopkins, student, James Joy. Oh boy, that doesn't get better than that. But, any other questions? So literally can't see doing all the business. Okay, well, yes.
I wonder, how would you suggest that the professors of today go about being, as you said, a friend to their student, loving their student, while still kind of staying within the constraints of what's appropriate in today's world with the relationships between a teacher or a professor and a student? Yeah. How can they kind of bridge that and get around any potential issues? And my prof certainly did came and drink beer with me, so I don't know what happens at the school that lady spoke at, but I feel bad for your students.
Yes, right. No, that's a good point, because these days you got to have a lawyer on each side, it's the whole thing.
Exactly.
But it sort of wrecks the spirit of the tutorial, it just sort of does that. No, I think that you just have to use wisdom and prudence, these days, I'm afraid. And it's not proper, obviously, to get into a parity friendship with the person you're responsible for. In a sense of total, that's just not healthy. It's just not. It doesn't work. By a parity friendship, I mean the friend of two people who are totally, like open to one another, that kind of a thing. Where you just that's the kind of friendship, which is a beautiful part of life. But if you have a responsibility for someone else, you can't get into that kind of relationship. But I think what I mean by this, by loving the students and by being a friend to them, or to others too, is to care about them, to see them as a person with dignity and respect. And have an authenticity in the way one approaches life. Not to treat the person as a thing, but you also do have to be careful about the issues you raise. And I think in those days too, but certainly now, but we always have to do that.
How does one draw that distinction between when you're becoming too much of a friend?
Well, I think you have to watch that, because it can happen unnoticed. That's why there's some things that I know when I was dealing with when I was in the seminary, and I just heard of another set of videos actually on this issue that I haven't seen yet, but I'm going to look at. It has to do with things called boundary violations, where something may seem to be quite normal, And yet, if you think about it, was that really wise? You know, to do that kind of, and it's where you meet the people, the circumstances, you know, that kind of a thing. You have to be really attentive to that, because if you are not, if you sort of slip into what is really an improper relationship, then that is both not spiritually healthy and also could be illegal. But I mean, it's just not proper. But a person, I think there are people who sometimes just don't think of that. That's why it's probably good for people in positions of authority or responsibility to have some kind of like a workshop or see a video on boundary violations. Sometimes things you might think are perfectly innocent are not proper. And so, you can slip into it easily.
Thank you.
Thank you, Archbishop. I have a question about conscience and the development of doctrine. You said at the beginning that Newman had some thoughts on that. Perhaps you could expand on that.
He does, but his main thing on conscience is found in his letter to the Duke of Norfolk, where he speaks about, he has this famous thing where he says that if he's going to toast, have a toast at the end of a meal, rather than toast the Pope, he will toast conscience. He says, if I'm going to have a toasting something at the end of the meal, which seems not quite the proper thing to do, I would rather toast conscience than the Pope. He calls it the aboriginal vicar of Christ. I mean, the fundamental. Now, most people will say, oh yeah, I mean, so you feel like you're going to do it, go for it. You know, that's better than the Pope or whatever. That's not what he's saying. He speaks of the stern duty of conscience. When you read Newman on conscience, it isn't what most people think when they think conscience is sort of, do you feel like it's good? Well, then if that God must be telling you it's good. He's very strong on the duty of following your conscience and the way that conscience is rooted in what we would call a well-formed conscience. So, because conscience itself, it should be conscience with knowledge. It shouldn't just be, if you feel like, you know, I think my conscience says I'll do it. The issue is not whether we have a conscience or not, we need to. The issue is it a well-formed conscience? That's where there's a mistake in the famous movie, which I love very much, A Man for All Seasons, where it is stated that, you know, the vision of conscience given there is by Robert Bolt, who's basically an atheist, although it's a great thing of more. He says, when I think it's Norfolk is talking, maybe it's interesting, the letter of the Duke of Norfolk and Norfolk 500 years earlier. And Norfolk was talking to him, you know, you sort of got to obey the king. And he said, no, it is not, sort of Moore says, no, it's not, I must not do this. It's not that I say it, but that I say it. I cannot do this. So it's the ego is the conscience. The ego says, I will not obey the king. I'm God's servant first. That's not what Moore was saying. If you read, fortunately we know what Moore thought, because he wrote to his daughter in the Tower extensive letters on what he meant by conscience. It was a well-formed conscience. He didn't know whether the king had power to do this or not. He studied it. He looked at the teachings of the church through history. He looked at the whole thing and came using his mind, his sense of the broad tradition of the church and the sacred scriptures, to the conclusion that the king did not have a right to do what he was doing. And therefore, he was willing to die for it. Not because I think so, but because, as he said, you cannot, as he in his final speech, the whole of Christendom has thought deeply about this, and Henry VIII didn't have the right to do what he was doing. So that's the view of John Henry Newman as well. It's not, and Newman is misused all the time to be a kind of the poster boy for, if you think it's okay, you feel like it's right, your conscience says, go for it. You know, my conscience rather than the church. That's not Newman's point of view. In fact, you can see it in that thing I quoted at the end, like talking about his letter on Scripture, where he says, here he is, the cardinal, brilliant, the great teacher, famous, and all the rest, and he is saying, here is my view on inspiration. However, I submit my teachings to the judgment of the church. I may be wrong. However, you must always, of course, follow your conscience. But the first step to that is, you must also form your conscience. And if the following is not preceded by the forming, we have a major problem. You may say, it's my conscience tells me, rob the bank. Well, if you really have convinced yourself of that, that might limit your guilt somewhat. But if you had a responsibility beforehand to look at that, is that right? Is that objectively right? Conscience is meant to be a navigation system. An image Newman did not use is just like a navigation system of an airplane or something. You've got to have the system working right, or you won't get to the right airport. You've also got to feed in, garbage in, garbage out. You've got to feed in the coordinates of where you are and where you're going. If you get that wrong, you won't get to the airport. The point is not to use the machine. The point is to get to the airport. And so if conscience is not well formed, it doesn't do its job. It's not magic. It just doesn't do its job. So I think that's Newman's view of conscience, although he didn't use the image of the airplane, but I think that's it. He's much, at the synod on the family it was at, a lot of people were flipping this idea of conscience around, a lot of people feel their conscience says do such and such. Well, okay, but what is accuracy? It's a navigation system. It's not a magic Ouija board or something. Again, an image I don't think Newman would have used, but I think it's the point he's making.
Thank you, Your Eminence, for being here with us. I know personally I'm going to leave with a new appreciation for our patron here at the house and of our chaplaincy. So thank you so much for sharing your enthusiasm and your imitations of him and your admiration, because it's very contagious. I know I will also be leaving with the image of the fishhook, that to speak heart to heart with those that we're trying to be of influence to. So thank you for sharing that with us. And on behalf of the Newman Center, we want to thank once again His Eminence Cardinal Collins for being here with us.
If you're interested, I might as well announce, I just put it up here if you're interested in seeing it. This, of course, is a picture of John Henry Newman as a young man, and this is one of his letters, written December 12, 1845, just about 2 months after he became a Catholic. So you want to see what his writing was? There it is. A little rough.